In today's episode, I'll be taking you into the cave, specifically Plato's Allegory of the Cave, as I discuss how this relates to acquiring knowledge and breaking paradigms. Welcome to Monologues by Hassie. Someone I spoke to recently mentioned how Plato's Allegory of the Cave had such a big impact on the way they were thinking about things. And I didn't really get the gist of it from that conversation, but I was intrigued enough to go and read the Allegory of the Cave, which is part of Plato's The Republic. So I didn't read the entire Republic. What I did was just read the Allegory of the Cave, obviously translated into English. And as a basic gist of a story, I'll recount it to you in my own words. So the Allegory of the Cave starts with the image of a group of prisoners who are chained in a dark cave, and they are facing the wall, and they can't see anything other than the wall that's in front of them. Now, behind these prisoners, there's a fire, a flame, which casts shadows from people and objects who pass behind the prisoners. So the prisoners can't actually see what's going on behind them, but they do see the shadows from time to time. And as the people behind them call out the names of these objects, for example, if I was carrying a vase behind the prisoners and I said vase, the prisoners, upon seeing the shadow of the vase, would come to associate the shape of the shadow with what they thought a vase must be. Now, as the story goes, these are the prisoners, and that is their reality. All they know is the shadows on the wall. They don't yet comprehend what else is in the world, both behind them and outside the cave itself. One day, a prisoner is unchained, and that unchained prisoner, upon turning around, realizes that all the shadows they've seen are not actually just shadows. There are objects passing and there's a fire, and they then leave the cave. Now, as soon as they leave the cave and enter the sunlight, they are absolutely blinded. If you've been in a very dark room and you've opened the blinds, you've probably encountered this, right? It's where your eyes are adjusting and it's initially very hard to see. So imagine a person who's never seen the sun, who's always been in a dark, very dimly lit cave facing a wall, who can only see shadows. How that must be like. So the prisoners left the cave and they're blinded by the light. And then their eyes eventually adjust to the light. These are new conditions, and this happens to all of us, and they realize how amazing the world outside the cave is. And it's so incredible that they say, well, we've got to go back and help the other prisoners. We can go free them and bring them to this amazing world. Now, the person who has the very noble intention of freeing his fellow prisoners goes back into the cave. But when you go from a high light area to a low light area, and you've probably also experienced this, your night vision is very poor. So if you have a very well lit room and all of a sudden all the lights go out and there's no lights coming in, the blinds are all closed, it's initially very hard to see. You're temporarily blinded. But even in this blind state, the prisoner still tries to free the freed prisoner tries to free the prisoners who are left chained to the wall of the cave. But the other prisoners realize that this man's blind, and they think that he's blind because he left the cave and went to the outside world. Therefore, they resist trying to be freed, because they assume that it's the outside world that's made him blind. And so that is the Allegory of the Cave, fundamentally. And it's a very interesting story. And I think what I personally pulled out of it is the relationship with the way that we are ignorant and the way we come into knowledge and the way we try to help other people out of ignorance. That is what this story is talking about for me, at least presently on my first reading. And I think we're all subject to being these chained prisoners, because no matter who you are, we're all limited by our senses. I'm limited by the fact that I can see things, I can hear things, I can taste things, I can smell things, I can touch things. But these senses are only the way that I can perceive the world. There are other creatures who can, for example, my dog can hear frequencies that I can't hear, which is why sometimes she barks in the middle of the night. There is a reality that I can't perceive. So my dog, when she's barking and I'm telling her, well, there's nothing to bark at, right? There's nothing happening outside. I am the prisoner in that scenario. I can see the shadows where my dog can see the real world. And my dog is trying to bring me out of ignorance, and vice versa. There are things we can't comprehend. But then in the human sphere, this is how knowledge works. Like, there have been so many times in my life where I have come into new knowledge. And when you come into new knowledge, your system is initially shocked. So that's like you are the freed prisoner, and then you've left the cave and the sun has entered your eyes. And initially, it can be very distressing to have your paradigms broken and challenged. But eventually you adapt to it and you realize how much better it is when you're above, outside the cave, when you're in the real world, when you can actually see the objects, not just their shadows. And at the same time, once you've come into that wisdom, once you've broken your previous paradigms, you then may try to help somebody else. And what you'll generally find is people can be hesitant, resistant. Maybe somebody who looks at me in certain aspects of my life where I'd like to do things, they probably still say, well, Hassie is currently still a prisoner staring at the wall. And if we were to try and give him this knowledge to help get him out of this, it would actually cause him to fight against us. So the same way that the prisoners who are left in the cave try to fight the person trying to free them when he re-enters the cave, it is a scenario where ignorance can make us very hostile to people who come to us with knowledge. So Plato's Allegory of the Cave I found very meaningful because I spent all of 2024 basically leaving the cave. And I think all I did in 2024 was get sunlight in my eyes after having been in darkness with regards to some of the goals I was trying to achieve. And that means that I'm only just starting to see how great the world is now. I spent a lot of time blinded because a lot of the previous paradigms I had about how easy things would be, about how things work, what work would be involved, completely fell through the floor because I was only exposed to shadows. It's the same way that, we can read something from a book, but a book is just a representation of something that might have actually happened in the real world. So when I read a book and when I get knowledge from a book, I can get book smart. That is like looking at a shadow. I can read about business all I want, but building a business is very different. There are things that are not in the representation, the book, the shadow. And therefore, the only way to get out of the cave is to go do the thing, to blind yourself, and then enjoy the fruits of the outside world. There's also another lesson from Plato's Allegory of the Cave, which is when you do enter the cave, and from what I understand, Plato is talking, the people who leave the cave are philosophers. And he's basically saying that as philosophers, we are the people who leave the cave, and therefore we get to enjoy the fruits of the total world. And once you're in the total world, and you see what happens to people who try to re-enter the cave to save their freed prisoners, the fact that they can be abused and harmed and killed because the prisoners who are still chained to the wall view the blinded former prisoner, the released, the liberated man or woman, they view them as a threat because they're temporarily blind. They don't understand the new knowledge that that person has. And so it's very tempting for people who have knowledge to stay outside the cave, above the ground, and simply enjoy the fruits. There's two interpretations. I think there's sometimes, and I've also taken this approach in many domains, and in particular with certain people, is that when you have come into knowledge, there are certain people who just need to find out on their own, or maybe they're just going to be tied up to the cave wall for the rest of their existence. It is not a good idea. There is not enough benefit for both myself or for them for me to go and free them, because they are going to harm me in that process. So sometimes it is best to hold back the knowledge you have, as unfair as that sounds. But Plato makes another argument, and from my very crude understanding of this, Plato talks about an ideal republic, right? That's what it's part of. And he says in an ideal republic, those who have gained the knowledge, right? Those who have done things. And he's talking about very philosophical wisdom. We might be talking about wisdom in an athletic sense, maybe wisdom in business, wisdom in domains that we are concerned with in the modern world. These people actually have an obligation to go back and help free the prisoners who are still in the cave looking at the shadows, even though that may come at great personal harm to themselves. And the reason for that is knowing what can happen and the harm that can come when you try to free your former prisoners, because their ignorance and your new wisdom, that is a hostile combination at times. You then become a hesitant leader of the people who are still in the cave. And Plato's argument is when a state is ruled by people who are hesitant to rule, so who have the wisdom but are hesitant, they are hesitant to lead. They do not want to lead because it comes with status, it comes with money, it comes with fame. They are hesitant to lead because they understand the costs of having that wisdom and the costs of helping people and freeing them from their chains, freeing them from looking at the walls. Only then is that state going to be a state that is very well run. And all other states are essentially abominations. And if you pull out that principle, then he's basically saying that there's an obligation for us to help people who are still in the cave. So all in all, I found this allegory incredibly useful considering the experiences that I've been going through all the way up to being 30 years old now. I realized that I'm always going to be a prisoner in some sense, but there will be times and there will be moments that will force the chains to be unshackled from me and for me to leave the cave, for that newfound wisdom and knowledge to absolutely ruin my existence because I'm blinded. But then I will eventually realize the fruits. And it's my understanding that I'm always going to be in the cave. It's simply impossible to ever have a complete grasp of reality. As I said, I'm limited by my senses, and there are many physical and I think metaphysical limitations on my ability to acquire all the knowledge of the world. I have come to the conclusion that I will be learning till the very day I die. And if I have come to the conclusion that I'll be learning till the very day I die, that also means that I will be the prisoner in the cave until the very day I die. But there are many different levels of caves and many different outside the caves that I will encounter as I progress through life. And even though it might seem futile, you will improve and I will become able to bear the fruits of these new worlds as I leave the caves that I'm currently in and move into higher order caves. So there's Plato's allegory of the cave, and the way I see it is I'm in a big cave system where there are multiple levels of caves that I need to progress through and multiple outside worlds that I need to progress through in different domains of my life. So the Allegory of the Cave by Plato was a very insightful read. I'm glad I came across it. I'm glad I had a conversation with somebody who said, you've got to go read the Allegory of the Cave, and I'm glad I did it. I'm very grateful to that person. So I'm going to end this episode here, and to everyone listening to this, I wish you great success on all your endeavors. You've just made it through another episode of Monologues by Hassie. It brings me great pleasure to know that you made it to the end. To listen to more episodes, subscribe on your favorite podcast app or visit monologuesbyhassie.com. Thanks for swinging by.